Is workplace bullying cultural? Is it better or worse in different parts of the world? Workplace bullying is a form of narcissistic abuse, so that lends itself to the question, is narcissism cultural? Are narcissism and workplace bullying culturally relative? I used to think they were. Years ago, in the bargaining stage of my grief about workplace bullying, in my desperation to at least alleviate, if not fully resolve the problem, I tried many different things, and that included working not only in multiple different industries, but also with people from many different cultures. I'd heard of a theory in psychology that people tend to have conflict with those with whom they have the most in common. So I deliberately strategized that if I worked primarily with people who were different from me, then no one would have a problem with me. I've now had the privilege of working one-on-one, sitting across the table with people from almost 80 countries, and can report that I was bullied pretty much consistently throughout all of it. Clinical psychologist and narcissism expert Dr. Ramani Durvasula has estimated, I believe, that narcissism is in about 25% of the population, which makes perfect sense to me because it perfectly reflects my own experience of having been bullied by about a quarter of my clients, leading me to conclude that about a quarter of the world's population is evil. And evil is everywhere. So is narcissism. Narcissists have been compared to vultures, which is appropriate because vultures are, I believe, among the few animals that exist on almost every continent except Antarctica and Australia. Indeed, the real pandemic afflicting humanity is not a virus, but narcissistic abuse. So workplace bullying as a form of narcissistic abuse may indeed be everywhere, but I believe that there are certain cultural characteristics that are particularly conducive to narcissism and workplace bullying. I used to think that bullying, which is in and of itself an act of aggression, would be particularly common in cultures that are particularly violent, characterized by this sort of militaristic Mars-like aggression both abroad and at home, ranging from invading, colonizing, and committing acts of torture in other people's countries to domestic violence in the form of mass shootings, police brutality, and gang violence. But violence is not just physical, it's also verbal, emotional, psychological, and even spiritual and energetic. And narcissism is a high conflict personality type. It's antagonistic and combative. When you are in the presence of a narcissist, you can just sense and feel this weird push-pull energy, this internal conflict between the narcissist's snide, sneering, contempt, derision, scorn, and disdain for intimacy, and his insatiable lust, greed, and desire for attention, all while refusing to let you touch the mask. It's like, look at me, look at me, look at me, like me, like me, like me, but don't get too close, which, as you can imagine, is just impossible to deal with. But more than violent aggression, I think that cultural characteristics that are particularly conducive to narcissism and workplace bullying are the competitiveness, the superficiality, and above all, the insecurity. While workplace bullies may never get actually physically violent with the target, although some of them certainly want to, I think you can agree with me that they are always highly competitive. Which brings me to an important aspect of workplace bullying, and that is unnecessary competition. And competitiveness is culturally relative, as reflected in another phenomenon that is also culturally relative: language. Words like competition and competitive are not considered good words in all languages, and that terminology extends to the criminal justice system. If, for example, a company is monopolizing all business in an industry, it can be labeled anti-competitive and even prosecuted as such. Competition has its place in certain industries, namely pro sports and sales, and that's about it. To my knowledge, members of sales teams are pitted against one another in a competition in order to drive up productivity. Competition in a workplace bullying environment is clinically insane. Totally crazy and sick. Like everything about narcissism, it defies all logic and makes no sense. Workplace bullies love to accuse the target of workplace bullying of being quote-unquote uncollaborative, not a team player, not playing well with others, not getting along with the others. And that's a projection if I ever heard one, because workplace bullies are the ones who have been engaged in unnecessary competition from the get-go. And the target of workplace bullying is almost always the most collaborative person in the place. Workplace bullies are obsessed with competition because workplace bullies are narcissists, and narcissists are obsessed with winning. International narcissistic abuse recovery expert Melanie Tanya Evans has stated that a narcissist is not winning unless someone else is losing. So in the warped, sick, dark, ugly, twisted minds of narcissistic workplace bullies, the whole place is a chessboard or a tennis court, or one of those god-awful reality shows parodied by the Hunger Games. Narcissistic workplace bullies engage in unnecessary competition even when the competition serves no use and no purpose, is not productive, and indeed may be wholly destructive. Workplace bullies are narcissists, and narcissists don't have any boundaries, so they really don't know how to stay in your lane, tend to your own garden, charity starts at home, pick on someone your own size. So they compete even outside of their own functions. You have the administrative assistant who's trying to compete with a teacher, or the math tutor who competes with the verbal tutor. Who does that? Workplace bullies compete for stuff that they don't care about and may have never even heard of before, never for a day in their lives even considered a career in teaching, but the day after they meet the target, a teacher, they sign up for a teacher certification course. Like all narcissist workplace bullies are superficial and shallow, so they compete for the stupidest, pettiest, and most trivial stuff you can possibly imagine. A byline on a one-paragraph blurb at the back of the publication, or the opportunity to deliver a presentation without pay to an audience of 5 on their lunch break. Much of the bullying that I experienced in the workplace was when I was working as a tutor. In the social hierarchy of my country, tutor is one notch above restaurant server, very much contract work and part of the gig economy. Tutoring has been called the new waiting tables, and you can Google that one if you want to. So if you're competing with a tutor, you are effectively competing with an Uber driver. Workplace bullies are slumming it. They need to aim higher. If you are a naturally competitive person because you have way too much testosterone or too much Mars and or Aries in your chart, then go ahead and compete with a Wall Street investment banker and stop trying to compete with your Domino's pizza delivery guy. Above all, the competition in a workplace bullying environment is completely intangible. Workplace bullies are competing for something that has no tangible material reward. There's no end game and no value proposition. If you're like me, you walk into the workplace for one reason and one reason only, and that's money. I'll compete for money. I'll even compete for a trophy if I can sell it on eBay for money. I love eBay. I'm a power seller. $25, I'm not competing. $40, I'll give it a shot. Workplace bullies may not even know what they are competing for, and if they did, due to their complete lack of verbal skills, would not be able to articulate it. It's like you cannot pay your rent or mortgage with attention. You cannot deposit approval into your bank account, and you can't invest validation in the stock market. So what are you competing for? Narcissism is also defined, at least in part, by superficiality. That too may be culturally relative, particularly in cultures that are advertising driven with an unhealthy imbalance and excessive focus on consumerism and materialism, where apparently the only things people can find to talk about are how they make their money and how they spend their money, where it's all about law of attraction and the power of positive thinking, which essentially means that you don't think, because if you do, you're too negative. I myself like to turn a blind eye to all the realities of the world, stick my head in the sand, and remain completely uninformed, because that's how I stay happy, happy, happy. It is that Cartrashian aspect of what Papa Francisco rightly called a disposable culture that lends itself very well to narcissism. Because if you are a boring, empty, shallow narcissist in a superficial culture, you can lead a completely brainless existence. You can spend all week making your money, and when you're not doing that, you can go to the mall and you can spend your money. And while you're at it, you can walk around making fun of other people for what they look like. We all know people like that. Superficiality also lends itself very well to objectification, which is a form of bullying because it focuses exclusively on the external surface of a person's body at the expense of that person's humanity. And objectification is violent. Objectification is a necessary precursor to all forms of physical violence. Let me say that one again so that you get it. Objectification is a necessary precursor to all forms of physical violence. If I want to get physically violent with you, I have to objectify you first. It's like a law of physics. I have to turn you into a woman, the gay guy, the Muslim, the fat guy. I have to make you other. Because if I don't, then I acknowledge our common humanity and I can't attack myself. Integral to the definitions of all forms of narcissism is insecurity. Workplace bullies love to swagger around the place with a lot of bravado and braggadocio, but what they really are is just insecure, attempting to project out an outward confidence to camouflage and mask their inner insecurity. And insecurity can be violent too. Insecurity is a form of fear, and all aggression arises out of fear. That's not some new age woo-woo I just invented. We know that. And insecurity can be culturally relative too. Certain cultures may exacerbate people's pre-existing insecurities more than others. For example, cultures in which entire institutions depend very heavily on your dependence. It's like a corrupt and unethical doctor who keeps you sick in order to keep your checks coming. In cultures that are excessively focused on image and money, there's a lot to make you feel bad about yourself. And that's how they do it. They make you feel bad about yourself so they can sell you the product you didn't know you needed in order to fix the problem you didn't know you had. People are financially insecure in a culture in which real wages have not risen in over 40 years. They're insecure about their level of education. In a culture in which quality education is increasingly becoming a privilege of only the rich, and they're emotionally insecure. In cultures in which psychologists estimate the majority of families are dysfunctional. So that's a summary of a point I want to make about certain cultural characteristics that may contribute to narcissism and workplace bullying. If you'd like to read more, I've written an essay on workplace bullying. It's on my website. I include that information in the description. The reason I create this video series is to establish a forum where targets of workplace bullying can share their stories and experiences in a kind of support group, so you can know, number one, you're not crazy. Workplace bullying is real and your feelings are perfectly valid and justified. And number two, you're not alone. Unfortunately, countless others have experienced the same thing. So I look forward to reading your comments and I'll try to respond. Take care.